So I'm going to move over swiftly onto our final webinar of the day by handing over to the chair of our trustees. And I can see that Claire has just come on. And Claire will be introducing the panel speakers for you. Thank you very much and welcome. And the last session of the day is dealing with hate on social media. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's been a brilliant morning, and hopefully we can close it with a really, really interesting session. It's a huge topic, hate on social media. It's a huge topic for charities, and we have a fantastic panel to talk it through. And let me very briefly introduce all three of them, and they're going to wave when I say their name, hopefully, so you can put a face to the name. We have Nana Crawford, who's the social media manager at the British Red Cross. We have Alex Hodges, who's the head of corporate comms and public affairs at Help for Heroes. And we have Hannah Graham, who is the head of digital for Tear Fund. And we've got about 40 minutes. Obviously, if you have questions, please ask them in the Q&A section if there's anything that you'd like to talk about. But I have a few topics I'd like to explore with those amazing panelists. I'm going to start with you, I think, Hannah, because in addition to the work that you're doing at Tear Fund, you have previously at another charity that we won't name, but actually it doesn't really matter because it's an experience that I think is quite universal. You have dealt yourself with hate on social media, and I wondered if you could share your experience a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Claire. Hi, everybody. So when I first started working in the sector, as Claire said, I was managing a social media channel for a charity that historically was receiving quite a lot of trolling. But whilst I was in post, that trolling kind of intensified, including to the point where a parody Twitter account was actually made, and people were kind of mocking and mimicking the content that I was putting out there. And all of this happened when it was my first job in the sector. So I was 21, 22, really young, and kind of being this first port of call of seeing the kind of abuse coming directed at the charity, but being received by me managing that channel.
And so that must have been quite distressing. And were the guidelines, was the support, how did it work? How was it managed at the time?
Yeah, it was. I think we were entering into a period when I joined where we had some trolling and we'd been able to deal with it ad hoc, but we didn't have any formal process. So kind of as a new starter and kind of new to the professional world, I think I thought that I needed to take on the responsibility to be working out the messaging, to work out what I was going to respond to, when not to respond. And I kind of entered in thinking, oh my word, how am I going to do all of this? And try to do it myself. And actually the charity were amazing. They were so supportive, and they kind of guided me and showed me how to put processes in place so that we had understanding across the organisation about how we were going to deal with this going forward. So we kind of made it up as we went along, but after kind of a period of quite intense trolling for a few months, we developed the processes, we developed what we needed to do. And I think crucially, we also got alignment. There are other parts of our charities who are dealing with negative press or unhappy supporters. And actually by being a bit more aligned in our silo departments, that can really help us as social media managers to find the messaging we need to and to respond in appropriate ways.
Well, Alex, I want to go to you too next, if you don't mind, because you've been working on trying to establish some support and guidelines that all charities can use. Because I mean, rather than reinventing the wheel each time, even though obviously, as Hannah was saying, her charity was very supportive, they had to start from scratch.
Yeah, thank you, Claire, and thanks for sharing your experiences, Hannah. It sounds like a tough time, but I'm really pleased that your charity were supportive. Last year, we came together back in July around the time of the Facebook boycott. 40 charities came together and wanted to do something, but we recognised that we couldn't afford to stop advertising on Facebook, and to be honest, the impact of charities doing it probably wouldn't mean as much as our words and our actions. So we decided to come together and come up with some recommendations for social media platforms. But in the process, we recognised that at the moment, a lot of the responsibility of managing hate speech was falling to the charities themselves and the teams that run the social media channels, but often without support, without training. So we pulled together a kind of cross-charity group that I led to come up with some best practice guidelines for charities, for teams who are working on social media, looking at everything from how you directly deal with content on your channels, mental health support and training for moderators, and lots of kind of a variety of things that just to help, really help teams who are struggling, help individuals. We know that charities sometimes have really small teams, sometimes volunteers who are running social media channels, so we wanted to pull that together. It's available on the charitiesagainst.hate.com website and is open to any charity to use to hopefully help support and inform.
And you use that as well in your day job in Help for Heroes. Was that one of the things that sort of got you to think about this question?
Yeah, we did. I thought it was Parkinson's UK actually that started the initiative, and I saw it ironically on Facebook, and got in touch and wanted to help and wanted to get involved. And the coalition of charities ran a survey, and 80% of the charity beneficiaries that we asked had experienced directly or indirectly hate speech. So it clearly is an issue, and we also talked to staff and supporters who were all reporting high experiences of seeing trolling or very offensive content. So it was kind of a bit of a passion project for me personally, but certainly something that our team use and that we hope other charities can get involved in.
And Nana, you work at the British Red Cross, and you've got a sort of live example of what happens when a topic that maybe doesn't seem so controversial to start with actually ends up creating quite a lot of backlash online. Do you want to talk about your experience doing that?
Yeah, sure. So I think with any campaign that we put out, we always try and make sure that we have our Q&As ready, and we try and think about the types of stuff that people are likely to troll us for or question us about. And I always say to the team that anytime we have a campaign, we put on our troll hats and act as trolls so that we can kind of like try and prepare as much as possible. Obviously, once we start work, we take the troll hats off because no one wants to have a long troll hat on. And then a really like one example that we found in particular that we're still trying to work on is around our work with refugees. So the British Red Cross is the largest provider of services to refugees in the UK. And it's something that, you know, if you're a supporter of British Red Cross, you know lots about. But I think the perception on social is really different that we found with our online communities on there. And often they're always really surprised when we talk about our work with refugees. And that comes with a lot of opinions and a lot of hate from certain people who don't like refugees, and it's always really difficult to manage those comments because you have to take the personal out of it, especially when you are a social media manager. And I don't know if Hannah and Alex agree that sometimes you see a comment and you really want to go in on someone, but you have to think, no, take a step back. This is a professional space, and you're speaking on behalf of your organisation as well. So that's the most important thing. But what we've actually found is through our communication of our refugee work, the more we've talked about refugees, the more we've actually had people in support of our work counteracting those comments and actually hitting back at people and being able to talk to those people in their way as well, and to be able to say the things that maybe sometimes we can't say, which has been great and really supportive. But it's also helped us understand a bit more about how we can make our Q&As a lot more robust, and how we can take some of the languages or some of the perceptions that people think about refugees and actually introduce education. So looking at content, so putting out content before we talk about a particular refugee story that helps people educate, you know, like this is the current situation. And I think that's something that was really missing before, that need for education. And through looking at the comments, through replying to those comments, we've been able to kind of put together a strategy around our refugee work, especially for our online community management.
That's really interesting. So education, preemptive education almost, and then you get to a point where maybe you have some self-moderating of your community, which is brilliant. If you can get to that, that's fantastic. I've got a few questions, but we have a really interesting question that's come up in the Q&A, where somebody is asking if you have any advice. They've had an issue in the charity. Apparently a staff member did something, maybe, I don't know what it is, they won't be specific, but maybe they forgot, they took a personal attack too personally, I don't know. And 2 years later, they're still recovering, they're still trying to move on. A lot of the hate they're getting on social media is still referencing that specific accident, that incident. I wonder if you have any advice on how to rebuild trust, how to maybe move the narrative along when something like that has happened, or if you have any personal experience to share. Good to you.
I can talk about sort of like whenever we've had, so this is linked to staff, isn't it? Ex sort of like,
yeah.
And so one thing that I always try and make sure whenever we are responding to people, sort of like one-on-one, or if someone's written a comment, is that we'll always send them a direct message and kind of make them realize that they're talking to people and not an organization. I think that's one of the things that people tend to forget when they start, you know, hammering away on their keyboard or venting, is that they're, you know, they have a frustration with the organization, but the person that's going to deal with that is a human being, is a person, and it's making that really clear to people. So whenever we have comments like that, we'll always take them into our DMs and just talk to them and say, look, I'm going to try and help you. This is, you know, I'm Nana, you know, and just kind of bring that human voice into it, and to make people realize that they're talking to people. Because often you find that some people are really angry when they post, but as soon as you reply and you pull them off, kind of pull them to the side and say, look, I can see you're really angry and I'm going to really try and help you, they flip immediately and they actually start apologizing, and they realize that their initial reaction was an outburst. So that's usually what we do. But I know that Hannah, you were going to comment on that as well.
Yeah, I've had a really similar experience to you, actually. I think that's great advice. The other thing I think to consider is about what voice you're amplifying. So if actually kind of people aren't loving your corporate speak or a message that's coming from the charity, amplifying the voices of the people that you're supporting, you know, who's benefiting from your work, and really promoting their voices on your channels, because, you know, people will be a lot slower to criticize somebody who's saying, I was struggling and they helped me, rather than you as a charity saying, look at what we're doing. So I think just be thinking about which voices are you amplifying if you're trying to build trust.
That's really great about it, and really focusing on personal voices and personal stories as well. That's what I'm hearing from both of you. We're getting also, and that's a linked issue, a lot of questions around when is it better not to respond. And Alex, I don't know if that's something you cover. You know, when should you engage, and when should you report or block or just not respond at all? Are there any wise words for people?
Yeah, of course, we had a really interesting debate on this actually in the group when we were coming up with the guidelines, and there was a bit of a divide. And it feels like a lot of charities default to hiding difficult content to avoid upsetting their community, and also so that they as a brand aren't associated with it. And the kind of conclusions we came to were, you've got a duty to protect your community. It's your space, it's your audiences, and it's often the people you support who are there to access services and information. So the bottom line, I think, is if it's harmful to members of your community, if it's individual and direct, definitely better to get rid of it and hide it. But if it's a society issue that you can actually play a role as a charity, as a brand in addressing, then we would favour engaging with it and trying to have a meaningful conversation, trying to educate. And often, as Nana and Hannah have said, the voices of your service users, your ambassadors, beneficiaries are so powerful in that. So we would say always report, and have really clear guidelines for your community and your pages. And if they're violated, then make that clear. But wherever you can, even if you are hiding content, try and engage with the user anyway via direct message, and try to unpick the issues and tackle myths and stereotypes, so that we are all contributing to improving the issues. I was just going to say that's kind of the guidelines we've put in place, but we, as part of the coalition, we're also calling on social media companies to do more. And that is one of our recommendations, that we do think social media companies should take more responsibility. I am seeing a couple of things pop up. I will share the guidelines in the chat, but also the kind of the group, the Charities Against Hate group, is absolutely open, and any charity who wishes to join. It's become a really nice space actually to get to know different people, different charities, share problem solve basically. And we're constantly improving and adapting the advice and working together. So I will share some links.
So great. So go to the links. But I think that also we've had a new panelist come in, but I hope if she wants to contribute anything, we're very happy to have her opinion on any of this. She's probably better at social media than we are. But I think, Hannah, this may come back a little bit to your point about alignment as well and escalation procedures. And I'm curious, maybe from either Hannah or Nana, what sort of, how does it work in your organizations when something comes up and this maybe the social media manager or volunteer doesn't know what to do? How does the escalation procedure works? Who decides whether to block, whether to report, and how is that put in place?
Yeah, great question. I think so. We have an agile comms process, which basically just helps identify who is signing off on what issues. There might be various things that you might get a lot of engagement with, who's signing off on those various issues and at what level and when. And that just helps our social media managers know when to escalate things and when not to. I think really the charity I'm at now, we don't get very many trolls. And when we do, we try and deal with them on a case by case basis, with blocking kind of being the last resort. But just going back to what Nana said previously, trying to take it offline and have that conversation. I think social media is often the quickest feedback loop that we have in our charities. We're getting instant replies when we put messages out there. And so actually we can also then be informing the rest of the organisation, saying to our media team, this is what people are asking, or saying to our supporter care team, you might get phone calls about this. And actually we can really support the rest of the organisation and come together and look at the messaging around specific topics because of that.
Yes, I think that's really an important point, is to make sure the information goes back up as well, because obviously it may not be fully representative of all the work, but there's going to be something there that needs to go back up to the rest of the team to make sure that that's reflected. And on that point, we have a couple of questions that are specifically on that point. The first one is somebody whose charity is getting a lot of people coming forward to say that the services that the charity provides are not good enough and they're having a bad experience with it, which is obviously an interesting thing that they should, I'm sure they're sending back to the sort of the rest of the team. But, any thoughts as to the best way to manage that? I mean, I suspect blocking and reporting is probably not the best strategy there. How would you go ahead and look at that? Any ideas?
So we've had stuff like that happen before, and we'll sort of take two approaches. We'll always reply to someone that has a complaint publicly, because you have to apologise and make the effort to set things right. I think that's really important. We always feedback internally as well, especially to whichever service area it is that's having that's had these complaints, because it's really important for them to see that connection between, you know, this, you think this thing's happening here and no one else is talking about it, but it's actually happening on social as well. And I think sometimes, again, people disconnect the, you know, like, oh, but everything's fine over here, you know, so no one really cares what's happening over there. So we'll always report internally and discuss with them, you know, what are the steps that they want us to take if people complain about a service. And often they'll have a complaints procedure that we can sort of like help people go through. Another thing that I've often found is sometimes really useful is that if a complaint is happening, sometimes not even on our channel, so it's out of our control to be able to respond, we've often found that members of staff or volunteers that have Facebook profiles will put themselves forward to respond on behalf of the British Red Cross to represent the service. So they will comment on, you know, whoever's complained, on their comments and say, we've seen this comment, we acknowledge, you know, this complaint, and we really want to help resolve this, so that we almost have advocates that work along with us and not just kind of like us as the social team dealing with it. So that's something that's really important for us. And another thing that sometimes we'll often do is if it's a grievance or a complaint that we think that needs more attention, then we'll always try and make sure that we get someone internally to take hold of it, and we'll make sure that we give someone a name as well, because often you'll find that if you say to people, oh, please just email us at complaints@Red Cross, it just feels like it goes into this pot of complaints and that no one deals with it. So we'll often speak to the service and say, look, who is the person that's going to deal with this? Can we give this person a name? Because it's really important that they have someone that they can reach out to. So those are the different approaches that we often take with complaints like this, of this nature. I think Claire's frozen. Yeah,
I'm back. This is great. We're having the full experience. We have children, we have Wi-Fi problems. This is 2021. I think most of this, Nana, and it was really fascinating. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on that specific issue before we are getting a lot of questions, which is brilliant. So I've got more, but I don't know if Hannah or Alex, you want to add anything? No, great. Well, another question, but I think maybe it covers a little bit what you guys were talking about before. There's question specifically, well, the example that's given is the Sainsbury's Christmas advert. How do you deal with someone saying, I'm a regular giver, but now I don't like you anymore because you have this new diversity pledge and I don't think that's right? How do you manage it when the feedback goes against your principles and your values and your aim, or is discriminatory, or is hateful? You know, what would you engage? Would you block? What's your approach, or several approaches? Doesn't have to be a one size fits all.
Yeah, I can speak in a bit to that. We had quite a similar thing happen recently. And I think actually we've made the decision, and this is our value as an organisation, this is what we think is important. And you have to weigh up the risk that actually what we wanted to say was, okay, if you don't want to support us, that's fine, because this is what we stand for. And so I think it goes back to that, making sure you're aligned in your messaging. But if you've decided as an organisation that you stand for this, then let's stand for that. And it comes back to what Nana was saying earlier about that proactive content. I think, you know, if you're wanting to direct people and say, this is what we think about, then put something on your website that says, kind of enables you to go maybe a bit deeper into why as a charity you're saying these things, and actually direct people to that. Do it in a personalized way, you know, say that you're sad to hear that, this is why we believe it, but actually we don't want to compromise on what we think, and we want to make sure that we're holding on to the values we have as a charity.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it sounds, I think that was the message that Sainsbury's gave at the time, even though they're not a charity, and I thought that was quite powerful. Any additional thoughts, Nana or Alex? It feels. Alex.
Are we both unmuted at the same time?
Yeah, we did.
You go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. I was just going to say more generally, I mean, I completely agree with what Hannah says, and I think especially with that example, absolutely should be calling it out and taking a stand. But again, we had this group of charities, we had an interesting conversation around how, if and when charities should get involved with kind of social good campaigns, for want of another word. So whether it was the kind of Facebook boycott, and there was a lot of conversations internally, the impression we got was a lot of marketing and comms teams felt quite strongly that they wanted to have a voice and take part and take a stand against hate speech, but they were getting some resistance internally because it wasn't directly aligned with charitable objects, and it was a slight not a distraction, but it was not their kind of core service delivery work potentially. So we came up with a kind of series of questions and a bit of almost kind of a decision tree to help inform and have a conversation internally. So it will be different for every organisation, but and often your individual, your staff members, your volunteers will feel very passionately about these campaigns, whether it's Black Lives Matter or it's online hate speech, and it's finding a way to be part of the conversation and contribute without kind of detracting from what your sort of core purpose is and why you as an organisation exist. And I think it's there's a real opportunity when it's done right, and there's the kind of social responsibility piece, but finding out how it fits with your values. So being really clear what your values are to start with, how this work contributes to it, what you as an organisation can offer if you've got something unique because of the group of people you support, because of the expertise you have within your organisation, then absolutely, I think there's a role that charities should take on, and having a strong voice on social media is a brilliant way to join those conversations and help further the cause.
And of course, it goes back to making sure that your staff or volunteers or the people who are dealing with the social media are fully equipped with all of these elements, because we are getting quite questions from Kenny Wood and Nicholas Jones about, what about smaller charities where, there's very few, there's less capacity, maybe the CEO of the charity is doing Twitter as well, or, maybe there are volunteers or people who are doing it part-time, any thoughts as to what's the best way to support these structures?
I mean, I'm in awe of charities that do that, and the small charities in particular who have a tiny number of staff or volunteers who are doing everything and usually doing several jobs between them. But I think the main thing is being true to your values and kind of choosing which campaigns, which initiatives you get involved in, and if you can contribute, fantastic, but if not, it's not furthering the issue. I suppose it's finding ways that you can contribute and show solidarity without draining very precious resource from the organisations and the brilliant work that you're doing, because you're already doing a fantastic job in society. So I think do what you can, but give yourselves a break would probably be my advice.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. I think there's, quantity is not necessarily, quality over quantity, I think in this case. Going back to you, Alex, because we just had a question from Charlotte about what is fairly normal versus a lot of trolls. And you mentioned a few stats at the beginning, which were incredible. And I wonder if you can give us some numbers. What is normal? Because Charlotte's just taken on social media recently into her team, and she's not clear on where she should be expecting. What's sort of an average amount of trolling versus something that should be concerning?
Oh gosh, I wouldn't want to speak. Yeah. I mean, every charity is different, and every community, I suppose, is different. But absolutely, we did a survey about 400 people, which included beneficiaries of multiple charities, staff members, and supporters. And 81% of the beneficiaries had experienced hate speech, either personally directed at them or they'd seen it and it had affected them. Of that, 42% was around race, 38% around gender, and 31% was disability and sexuality, which is really interesting. And the beneficiaries said it left them feeling angry, frustrated, and upset, had a lasting impact, and in some cases it led to them disengaging from social media altogether, which is problematic for charities, because many of us are hugely dependent on it as a tool for raising awareness of our services, of information, and of course the fundraising as well.
So fairly widespread.
Yeah, exactly. And on the staff, I think it was a much smaller pool of staff who responded to the survey, but 77% said they hadn't had any training in dealing with online hate, while 61% had experienced it, kind of had witnessed it in their current roles at the charities they're with. So there clearly is an issue, and I think it's not guaranteed for the person who's just joined a new role. I think it is about, as Nana said, preparation is key. Having as many planned scenarios in place, FAQs, working with, if you're fortunate enough to have colleagues that are working on campaigns with you, then to identify what the potential issues could be, what are the controversial questions, plan some responses, and then in terms of the moderators, it's giving yourself time to switch off, to detox, not spending every hour of every day looking at social channels, and knowing what works for you. So if you see something hurtful or upsetting, then what's best for you? Is it just to switch off, get out for a walk? Is it to have a conversation with someone you trust, whether it's a peer or your line manager, and just finding ways to remind yourself that the good outweighs the bad, and the power of social media and what you're doing is contributing far beyond that one comment or thread.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point, and the impact that, I think, Hannah, you mentioned it at the beginning. I don't know if you want, I mean, I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but the impact it can have on your mental health, when, even if it's not directed to you, when you're subject to that sort of trolling, it's so important to take the time and find ways to create some space.
Yeah, definitely. It really affected my mental health, and it kind of pushed me, in the way Alex described, totally off social media. You know, I didn't want to be in that space, even in my personal kind of digital space, because actually of the experiences I had. And I think one thing that's really hard with social is that it follows us everywhere. You can't, it's really hard to switch off from it. So one of the things that we try and do is have kind of work profiles for social media managers on their phones, so that they don't have to have it. They don't have to feel like they're on call all the time. And having something like an out of hours rota, you know, if you are going to be having to deal with things out of hours, working out who's going to be responsible for that, so that one person doesn't have to be on all the time. Because I think that is, you know, so draining and can lead to us being really mentally unwell.
Yeah, I mean, and for anybody managing volunteers or staff that deals with social media, I think that's something to be really important to keep in mind. Nana, I'm going to come to you. There's one question here about, and I'm coming to you because I know the British Red Cross works with a number of public figures. And what happened, I don't know if you've come across a situation where a public figure you work with is being attacked online, and the work that you're doing is sort of being caught into the attacks against that person, or in fact, Alex or Hannah, I don't know if that's something that you've come up with.
So when we've had this happen before, I think we've been really fortunate in the sense that the people that we've worked with, any public figures, we've spoken to them in advance about anything like this happening, so that if it does happen, they don't panic. I think a lot of it goes into your preparation, because if you don't brief people on the negative sides of social media, when it does happen, people instantly panic. And I've been in other positions where someone's just had one bad tweet, and you know, all of a sudden we're all in a boardroom talking about this one bad tweet that someone's received, and you're just kind of like, okay, I've seen worse, but you know, okay, we'll go with this. So I think a lot of it is down to preparation, and similar to some of the questions that have come up before, it's about having your boundaries of where you think, right, this is where we need to respond publicly, or this is where we can just kind of leave it, because after a while it will eventually die down. You tend to find that once someone tweets, and you get lots of people tweeting, and it's always within a certain group, and it's always quite, you know, kind of like a certain group, and they all follow each other, and they're just all kind of like egging each other on, and it's nothing to be concerned about. You can look at the channel and think, oh my gosh, all these people are messaging, but then once you start to kind of click on their profiles, you realize they all have the same bio, they all follow each other, you know, so it's kind of, they're just egging each other on. But it's always about reassuring that public figure, the person that you're working with, and reassuring them that, yes, we're checking on these comments. We don't think there's anything to worry about. It hasn't been picked up by media. You're completely fine. You know, leave it to us to manage these. And if we feel the need to have a statement, then we'll come back to you, or we'll prepare a statement just in case we need you to say something. So I think it's really important to reassure the people that you're working with internally and the public figure that, you know, these are the processes that we have in place to manage things like this. And I just wanted to just go back just a little bit, just to touch on what Alex and Hannah were saying earlier around social media and mental health. And I think one thing that's really important for any organisation is, you know, if you stand for something, just believe in what you stand for. You either stand for something or you stand for nothing. And I think that's really important in kind of anything that you're doing. And one thing that was like really difficult for my team was around when we decided, right, we really want to support Black Lives Matters on our channels, and we might get sort of like comments, and we did get really like personal comments. And for me, I was just like, right, I'm not going to manage any of these comments because I will feel personally attacked. So before we went out, I decided, right, we're going to put out these posts on these days, and I brought other people from the team to community manage those comments because I had to remove myself from that situation. So I think sometimes it's okay to do that, and often it's better for you to do that because and I made sure that I never looked at any of those comments because they probably would have riled me right up, and I knew that that was not the place that I wanted to be mentally as well. So I think it's always really important to look at having a backup support for your team, so that you're not always relying on one individual to do that. And however you do that, it's really important to give those people a break. So I just want to kind of bring that sort of like how sometimes your business as usual can then merge into your professional side and your personal side. And, you know, for me, that was a really difficult time for me because I was going through that personally and then having to do it at work and then having to community manage. One of them had to go, so the community management was just something that I was like, look, I'm just going to take a step back from this because this is too much for me. And it's okay to admit that. And I think a lot of the time we feel like we need to don on our armor and, you know, fight the battle and all that, but you know, that kind of stuff doesn't help with our mental health. And sometimes people think that it can be a sign of weakness, but it really isn't. And it was the best decision that I made for myself and for the organization at that point.
I think that's a brilliant point, and it's actually a really brave thing to do, to step back and say, I'm going to let somebody else manage that. I think and it's the only way that you can keep doing what you're doing. So I don't know, Hannah and Alex, if you want to add anything to that specific point, but I think it's so important to realize that as well.
Yeah, in terms of the mental health side of things, Nana, I think that's so wise, really good advice. We have actually added the fact that our social media team is exposed to this in our risk strategy or our risk kind of log. I can't remember what it's actually called, but that means that every quarter we're reviewing it and trying to mitigate it. And the main thing that we're doing is just making sure we're looking after our staff. And you know, it's nothing crazy. It's just simple. Are we having wellbeing check-ins with the team on a regular basis? And that just makes such a difference. Are we identifying trigger points that certain people find harder to deal with, and then bringing other people in when that is kind of the main thing that is being talked about on our channels. So just, you know, it's social is live. Don't just do one assessment and think about what you're going to do. Keep talking to your social media team, keep looking after them, because it's ever changing, as everyone knows. So we just need to protect those teams.
Yes, I think that's actually a really good piece of advice. Bring it to your risk register and just make sure that you're constantly reviewing it, because as you say, it doesn't go away because you've done one check-in. So I think that's really it's a really good way of making sure you don't leave it for later if it's there and you have to keep reviewing it. We've got a question from Amy about where she can get some guidelines on responding to the comments. Amy, I think Alex has posted the link, or we will post a link to the guidelines that she's put together with her Charities Against Hate group. And I think that's a really good place to start in terms of, because she's been charged with responding to comments with very little training. But I think all of these points as well about making sure you covering in terms of mental health, that you have other people who can step in, all the points that the team, the panelists have all brought up are so important. So it's not something you do as a sideline at the end of the day. I think it's fair enough to say. We're getting to the end of our time, unfortunately. I'm sure everybody's super hungry and ready for their lunches, but I would, I'm just going to open it for one final remark, Liz, if we have time, for all of our panelists, and then I think they can continue to chat with people on Remo for those of you who want to keep the conversation going.
Yes,
so
please go for it. One final remark. That'd be fantastic.
Quick one. Who wants to start? Alex, you can start.
Sure. Just wanted to say thank you, and Nana and Hannah. It's been great to chat to you about this, and yeah, please do have a look at the Charities Against Hate resources, charitiesagainst-hate.com, and it's not prescriptive. There's no kind of onus on charities. It's really just a forum to share expertise, learning, and rally together and try and tackle the issue of hate on social media. But thank you all for listening, and hope that you found it interesting.
Thank you. And Hannah?
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, just thank you everybody for engaging, and Nana and Alex for sharing your wisdom. It's been great. I think my top thing would be just look after your social media staff and be proactive as well as being reactive.
And finally, Nana.
Whenever you're planning your comments or responding to your comments, just be firm with what you believe in and what you think is right for your organisation, and and don't try not to take the comments too personally. That is my biggest piece of advice, because just and before you respond to a comment, breathe. That's what I always do. I always read the comment, I breathe, and then I reply. I often find that just taking that little breath helps you kind of really center yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all three of you. I'm handing over to Liz now, and I hope you guys have a great day for the rest of the day.
Amazing panel, great discussions. Thank you so much, Claire, for hosting, and to Alex, Nana and Hannah for speaking on this crucial topic. It's so prevalent today. Just to wrap up, you have the option to join Nana, Alex, Hannah and Claire in Remo for the extended Q&R just now, or you can network with your peers also in Remo. And we do have one final animated video about new charity digital hubs if you want to stay in the stream and chill out and carry on watching. We have more to come in our Be More Digital Conference 2021. Our digital workshops are happening tomorrow, and our dedicated network session is from 12 to 1. So head over to the Event Hub to find out how to join us in Remo. Thursday sessions will be focusing on digital fundraising and digital service delivery and operations. And you can find out more and what to expect in our Event Hub also. Thank you once more to all of our sponsors, speakers, and to you all who have participated with us. And we look forward to connecting virtually with you all over the next couple of days. Thank you.